If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that humans will believe almost anything. On Blasphemy with Chris and Marnie, we take a look at some of these beliefs, uncover their very human origins, how they've developed and changed over time, and the very real consequences they had in society and culture. Impacts that continue even today in our lives. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Chris Setti, and with me, as usual, and all the time right now, because we're stuck in the house together, is my beautiful wife, Marnie.
Hi.
So tonight, what I want to talk about is, because not all beliefs revolve around religion or spirituality or those types of things. I want to talk about one that is incredibly pervasive, and it's something that probably everyone who's listening to this has heard and probably believes in. They might have differing opinions about it, but they probably believe that it's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the concept of there being a human alpha male.
Yeah, that feels like something that's really just like a given. Like everyone's like, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it actually has a really interesting history, which we're going to go through. And we're going to see that maybe this isn't something that you should believe in. And maybe you're actually damaging your life and the lives of other people around you if you embrace it. And that's what's so interesting about belief to me is while we can believe in all kinds of things that aren't real or true or really aren't what they seem, we still order reality around that belief and we make them true in a sense.
Yeah.
And the impact of that sometimes is like, yikes, we shouldn't have done that, right? We shouldn't be presenting this out into the world as truth because
if you believe it, you make it.
Is that the quote? Who you quoting? if
No.
you believe it, you make it.
Oh, it's lost. It was something that we've talked about before, and it's not coming to me. So we'll just.
It sounds like an HGTV show a little bit.
Well, it's just like
If you
belief.
believe it,
If we collectively believe something, we make it happen, and then it's quote unquote true.
sure,
Because
like,
it's happening, and you're like, no, it really happens. Like you see this happen, and in reality, it's because a whole collective of people decided it was true and acted accordingly.
right. It's kind of the idea of like perception shapes reality because we act according to our perceptions, and then reality is the result of that because we're the ones doing. I mean, a part of reality is the result of that because we do shit in line with that. Crazy.
So that's why we do this whole podcast, to put critical thinking into all belief so you can decide with intention what to believe so that you don't participate in creating some fucked up reality.
Right, exactly. It's not like we don't believe things. Of course we do. Everybody does. But being careful about what you believe, especially when you start acting and like embodying things in the world that maybe are disruptive and toxic, like the story we'll talk about tonight, you got to really be careful because you can just really get yourself down the road and waste a bunch of time around a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, the older I get, the less time I want to waste. I want to be like, I'm not going down that road. People have like this belief and that belief, and I'm like, I don't got time for that.
Yeah.
I got things to do.
Right. Luckily, we're super young, so it's like we're talking about when we do get older. Jesus. Okay, so because this is one of those kind of things where it's not like, here's a fun story about someone that made up this nonsense and stuff. This is a little different. And because it's in the world of like science, technically, I mean, that's where this kind of emerged from, even though it kind of took on its own life in the culture at large and as it evolved in society and all that kind of shit and media and all of that. It's still science, though. It's still like, it sounds true and you can buy books about it and all this kind of shit. But I want to start with, I'm going to read this introduction because it has kind of led to really dark justifications, dark areas of our world that aren't just dark in a hypothetical and kind of, they're dark, but, they're to themselves over there. It's erupted in violence that has, murdered people. And I'm going to show you that it's tied to this concept and that this concept is maybe something that we shouldn't be believing. And so on Friday, May 23rd in 2014, a young, disaffected man killed 6 students and injured 13 during a shooting spree that took place throughout the Santa Barbara region known as Isla Vista, an area that caters almost exclusively to students from nearby UCSB. He left behind many videos and a detailed manifesto he entitled My Twisted World. In his various materials, he continually refers to himself as the Supreme Gentleman and bemoans his lack of female attention. In the video he posted just prior to his murderous actions, he stated, "Soon you will see that I am the super one, the true alpha male." And while we're all familiar with that terminology, most are not aware of the history and evolution of the research and ideas that spawn this belief, one that is now showing up in toxic and violent ways in our culture. It has led to subcultures and movements such as pickup artists, men's rights activists, and incels, all of them commiserating around their lack of romantic action and turning their sights on the clear culprit, women, and more specifically, their inability to identify who the true alpha males are. We hear it all the time in articles, shows, movies, and from places like the alt-right crowd. As a human male, you're either an alpha or you're a beta, and women only want alphas. But where did this idea come from? Like, is it just a biological reality that we've recognized, and labeled and, just like any other animal behavior? Or did it come from somewhere else? And so what I want to do is tell you it's actually a very short history of how we got the concept of the alpha male when it comes to humans, right? Because when I first started like looking into this, I thought, when did the whole idea of an alpha male enter into our vernacular? Like, when did that concept come? And, it felt like one of those things where it's like, you think that, it's probably a couple hundred years old, and it turns out to be like Socrates or some shit, like a long time ago or something. It felt like that, that ingrained. Like, of course he's exist, and we've seen it all along, and, I felt like that. But when I actually looked into it, it turns out that the first mention of an alpha animal, and it was a wolf, an alpha wolf, wasn't until 1947. In 1947, this guy named Rudolf Schenkel, he had been studying wolves at this zoo in Basel, Switzerland, right?
And that was like 71 years ago. My mom was born in 47. So.
There you go. Good, nice little time check. And he'd been studying through the 30s and 40s these wolves to kind of determine and establish what he called the sociology of the wolf. And so he's studying them, and he puts this paper out.
And he was studying the wolf because he was into wolves. And it wasn't about people.
No, he's a wolf nerd. There was no it wasn't about that at all.
Yeah, he was just looking at the behavior of wolves because that was his line of research.
Yeah, he was basically an ethnologist, right? A animal behaviorist, ethologist, whatever that's called. He was just studying wolves because no one had ever studied wolves before.
Yeah.
And wolves had become endangered. They were all in zoos. And so he studies them over in Switzerland in this zoo all through the 30s and the 40s. And in 1947, he puts out this paper. And in the paper, this is what he states, quote, "A bitch and a dog as top animals carry through their rank order and as single individuals of the society. They form a pair. And between them, there is no question of status and argument concerning rank, even though small factions of another type, jealousy, are not uncommon. By incessant control and repression of all types of competition within the same sex, both of these, quote, alpha animals defend their social position. So this was actually the first time the word alpha was used to denote an animal of the highest rank of any kind. And he picked alpha because in the Greek alphabet, that's the first letter. That's it. And there was no other thinking behind it. And notice it's not focused on an alpha male, okay? And what he noticed as he's studying these wolves is that, a male from within the ranks of the wolves and a female from within the ranks of the wolves fight within their own sex until one of them reaches the top of their particular sex, and then they form a pair, and the rest of their life they spend defending that rank against all these usurpers who are trying to supplant them. Okay, that's what he saw, and that's what he published in the paper. And this was like foundational, groundbreaking. No one had ever studied wolves, so this was like, whoa, new information. We didn't know this.
Yeah.
And there was zero thinking about humans here. Okay, we're not even there yet. This is just the first time alpha wolf was used. Alpha anything, but I mean the alpha wolf, right? So then what happens in and really the whole concept of an alpha male or an alpha wolf or an alpha animal really is, he wrote this, and this is like scholars would read this shit, right? This isn't like you're like cracking this open, at home to like have some fun. This book wasn't printed and available in bookstores. It was like colleges and universities and research groups and shit like that. It's very scientific. So it's not like this idea is spreading, throughout culture. Right? No one's reading this. And so really up until about 1960, you don't really see anything out there. Some things start popping up. But then in 1970, a guy named L. David Meck, who was an American animal researcher, right? Research like biologist or what have you. He wanted to kind of repeat the study that Schenkel did to see and do his own thing to see, like, this is the scientific method. You did this and you saw this. Now I'm going to do it and see if I see the same thing. And if I don't, then we're going to figure out what the fuck happened.
Yeah.
So that's science, by the way. That's why I just explained science. Something like that. And so L. David Meck, we'll just call him David. He's out there. I don't know what the L stands for.
Yeah,
I'm always suspicious of people. Like if I were like, I'm C. Kent SETI. That's so fucking weird. But anyway, he it's probably like Lynn or Lenore or something like that. That isn't like, but. He goes out and he studies wolves, again, in captivity, because there weren't this. So now we have, like, we live up here in Spokane, Washington. There's like wolf packs roaming not that far from here. Yeah. There are people that want to hunt them and have a wolf season because they've been reintroduced. They've come back
their
really well.
As well.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily support that, but I mean, that's how many there are.
You don't support hunting them?
Wolves?
You just said that. I wanted to clarify what
I
that
don't support.
was.
I don't think I support. No.
Okay, I'm not debating it with you. I was just clarifying what you were saying.
I think we should just once a month tie a sacrificial cow or something out, or town troublemaker, and then the crops will grow and everything will be fine.
Yes.
Things were so much simpler back
do
then. It's like tie a virgin on a stake, let the wolves come, bam, good harvest. So anyway, he goes out there, he's studying wolves, also in captivity, like I said, and sure enough, totally confirms everything that Schenkel had confirmed. And so in 1970, he writes this book, The Wolf, The Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species, right? And of course, they're racing to like, the timeline was like, we might lose all the wolves. Like it was looking that way, right? And so, this was a big deal. And still, it was still a scholastic kind of like academia thing that you would, if you were in wolf class or whatever you took, biologist or whatever, they would have this. But then what happens in 1981 is they put it out in paperback. And this is when like malls are popping up and like Walden Books and all these huge booksellers, and they got to fill the fucking shelves,
remember
right?
When there used to be bookstores that people went to?
They were awesome. I used to love. Remember when
Barnes and Noble, but they're just not everywhere. Like you used to like go to a bookstore.
Marnie and I had 4 little kids at one time, little kids, and they're big kids now. We still have them.
We still have the kids. They're big now.
Dude, it was so nice. We would go into like a friggin' Barnes and Noble or Hastings or whatever, and you just like, your kids can run wild and go do shit. And you're just like, okay, I'm gonna be over here, God. But yeah, bookstores. Oh well. But anyway, it's released in paperback in 1981, and it becomes a huge hit. People are reading this. I can't imagine being that hard up for something to read that you're like, that, you know. But I guess wolves and endangered, I don't know.
Yeah.
So in 1981, it gets released in paperback. It shows up, you know, there's just more choices, more opportunity. People read it. And it really is a thing that cements the concept of the alpha wolf in society. In fact, he will tell you, I've seen him quoted and watched YouTube videos of this guy. He will tell you, if you've heard the term alpha wolf, it came from my book. You could trace it back because no one fucking read all that other shit before.
Right, the 1947 stuff that was
his
in
book,
science papers.
Right, becomes available to the consumer market. And so he's kind of the origin point of it in society. And so he confirms it, though, like, hey, yeah, the male, female, they fight through the ranks. They establish this dominant pairing, and then they just, defend it.
Yeah, okay.
So that's how it's going. But you're like, okay. And, and they use, like, dogs, too. So, because dogs are so similar to wolves, they also studied dogs at the same time. Both of them did. Right. And so they found, kind of did similar things and watched dogs and whatnot. And so they were kind of using that because there weren't a lot of wolves. They didn't know a lot about wolves. And so, they got to fill in the blanks. Right. But still, it's like, what the fuck does that have to do with people? Right. We never go like, oh, my dog does this just like me. Like nobody, my dogs are idiots, like they don't do anything. Like we're way different than dogs. But what happens is while the initial investigation of the alpha concept was around wolves, the bridge to humans, right? This concept of an alpha over to humans happened through a much more similar creature to us, right? Chimpanzees. So in 1982, this Dutch primatologist, his name was Fons de Waal, crazy name, just Fons, like but it's F-A-N-S. But Le Fons de Waal, he studied chimpanzees over in the Netherlands, and he presented his findings as conclusions and real insights, not just into primate behavior or chimp behavior, but human behavior. So when he presented his findings and kind of what he saw happened with these chimps, because they're so similar to us, right? Like we're like 98.9% exactly like them genetically. Like our DNA, we share that much DNA with each other, right? And so it's kind of like, oh, there's alphas and wolves, and then there's alpha males in chimpanzees. There must be alphas in humans, right? I mean, it makes sense, right? They're kind of doing science, right? And we'll see. They weren't trying to fuck up. They weren't like out there doing crazy shit. They were doing real science and writing down what they observed and publishing those results. And in at least one case, it was confirmed through further study. And so it's kind of like they're like, we're on the right track. And so the book that Fons de Waal put out had that hook, was basically like, here's what I learned from chimps, and you can learn a lot about you, basically, like, or humans and how you work. And it was real heavy on the whole alpha male concept. That was mostly what he talked about when it came to humans. And it became a big hit. Companies would buy it and give it to their salespeople, to their executives. It became big with politicians, anyone in power, or, whatever. Yeah. And so you begin to see this idea spread of like, there are alpha males in human society, and we can learn something from observing these animals that are very much like us.
Right.
Chimpanzees.
Well, and so that's how it became real. Because when you start infiltrating an idea and telling people to behave a certain way because this is going to bring you success.
No, I hear you. Absolutely. No one's blaming anyone at this point. This is just how it's going, right?
No, I'm not blaming. I'm just talking about how it becomes very real.
Oh, yeah, totally. Right? Yeah. Because if people then start going, oh, chimpanzees act like that, and I'm just like them, and this scientist just told me that I can get the same thing from doing the same behaviors, they start doing it. Yeah. Right? But that whole concept is based off of going, hey, we're real similar to chimps, so we must be a lot alike. Yeah. And while that seems to make sense, one, as science learns more and more about these individual species, even ones that are super close to each other, they find more disparity than they do commonality, right? Even within species, they find a huge variety of behaviors that kind of revolve around a common thread, like they have a kind of a baseline behavior, but then there's some wild variation depending on environmental pressures and all kinds of shit, right?
Right.
And so it's not as cut and dry. For instance, when Schenkel used dogs and Mech used dogs as also kind of to fill in some blanks because, hey, they're so much like wolves. Later studies, they did one study where they brought in dogs, just normal domesticated dogs, and then they brought in wolves that were raised by humans even. So they had that kind of domesticated edge to them, even though they weren't dogs, they're still wolves. They were raised by humans to kind of try and make them even more similar in their behavior, to kind of remove that wild variable from them. And they put them in a room where they put food in cages that there was no way for them to get into at all. They could never reach the food. What they found was that they would all start trying to get at the food, but the wolves would never give up. They would never stop trying to get at the food. It would continually look for weaknesses in the system, even looking to each other to try and team up and figure out how to do it. While the dogs would look for try for like a minute and then go over to the human or sit down and look at them like, fucking open the door so I can get the food, right? So it's makes sense to compare super similar creatures, but what we're finding out is sometimes the shit that makes sense turns out that it's not like that at all. And so there may be a lot more difference even in these very small genetic variations, whatever. Because you think about chimpanzee, sure, we're a lot alike, but if we wanted to, we could obliterate every chimpanzee on this planet like that. No problem. We might share almost 99% of our DNA, but they're not flying in planes overhead, and they're not fucking, there's a big difference between a very small, In the 1990s is really when you start to see this idea of the human alpha male gain traction out in the media, in popular culture, and kind of the zeitgeist or whatever you would say, the kind of the thing, the soup that we all kind of live in, Here's a quote. Take a powder-sensitive guy, win a USA Today article from 1996. The new ideal man, at least if you believe the latest issue of Esquire, is a superior fellow the mag dubs the alpha male. And he's putting the man back in manhood.
So that's when it really...
Yeah, that's when, it starts getting put out there as, to everybody.
Yeah, because there's one thing that's it's in a book and it's being handed out to people in their... seeking work development, but then put it in a magazine,
right?
And that's even more going into the general. But and that was 90s,
1996, right? It even played a role in the discussion around the presidential campaign of Al Gore. And so here's this quote: "Can Gore go alpha?" wondered the New York Times in a 1999 article, which went on to offer some thoughts from experts on how Gore could achieve the alphaness he was seeking. One of the experts suggested that he was just too loyal a husband and father to be an alpha. This was a woman too, by the way. This is what she says, quote, "He stays with the same woman. He likes his kids. He's photographed with the grandchild. He doesn't hide his age. He's perfectly decent, and real men aren't perfectly decent." And so she's saying he comes off as a good guy who's just trying to embrace where he's at, and just be. They're like, no one wants you because you're too decent. So you can see how this thing is starting to turn into this insidious kind of idea that the worst parts of us somehow express this alphaness, right? It's so weird. But that same year, L. David Mech releases another paper in 1999. It's called Alpha Status, Dominance, and Division of Labor in Wolf Packs. This time, because we had these Endangered Species Acts and all these rehabilitation programs, we had actually got the wolf population back to a point where we started releasing them into the wild, especially up near the Canadian border and stuff all along the northern United States. And so all of a sudden, the opportunity presents itself to study wolves in the wild, which had never been done. And so David Meck hops on that because he's super wolf dude.
He's the one that did
He's the one that confirmed. He's the one whose book was kind of like put it out there.
So he goes back to study them again.
Right. Well,
but in a different context.
Different wolves, but yes.
But in a different context of in the wild.
Right.
To even further try to confirm.
Exactly. And so he's out there, and what he finds out is, oh shit, that's not how they behave at all when they're just doing their thing out in the wild. It turns out that the dominant pair of wolves are parents, and the rest of the wolf pack,
as it should be.
Yeah, exactly. And the rest of the wolf pack are just their offspring. It's a family. So there's not they don't fight through the ranks. That's not how it works. A female and male get together, have puppies, and that becomes a wolf pack as they raise it. And any dominance and the things that they display are just parental instinctual duties and responses in order to keep the pack operating and surviving.
And training the little wolfies.
Exactly. They have super complex social structures. It's not this simplified thing of you fight your way to the top and then you like fight to maintain that position. That is what every man is told our experience is going to be. Is you got to fight to grab something that you want, and then you have to fight off men constantly to keep it away, because this is what we've taught men to operate as. But see, here's the problem is it entered into the popular culture before that, right?
Yeah.
And so now we have facts come in, scientific facts that refute the old stuff and go, oh shit, like we were wrong on that whole thing, on the whole alpha thing. And then that gets picked up by the chimpanzee dude, right, in 1982, which then ties it to human behavior. And so now we're like, oh, man, we've got this whole thing going on where it turns out there are no alpha male wolf. There's no alpha wolf. It doesn't exist. And the idea that there's an alpha male because of studies on chimpanzee is dubious at best. But now we've got it like fully going in our culture. We see these newspaper articles and magazines like saying the alpha male's the thing to be, right? But
so did you say that in the study of the chimpanzees, they did see alpha behavior, but was that also in captivity?
So the idea of an alpha animal is probably a false concept to begin with, because are there dominance structures in chimpanzees? Yes. Just like there are in humans. There are. It's not that we're arguing that we don't have dominance play out in our hierarchies. Okay. Right? It's this simplified, reduced idea that we can categorize it as this or that. You're an alpha or you're a beta. Okay. Right? And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the way that animals are classified when it comes to these relationships, like specifically mating relationships and the dominance around that, since that's mostly what it's around. Yeah. But it's not as cut and dry as we want to make it. The wolf thing was more complex than the way they simplified it. Yeah. The same thing with the chimp study. We've done way more studying since then. I mean, look like Jane Goodall. I mean, she's been out there, living with chimps for 80 years or some shit. I don't know. Yeah. Like we know that they're vastly more complex and more surprising and more varied than we want to make them. And so now that it's entered into kind of the public consciousness, still through the 90s, while we were talking about humans in with this idea of them being alpha males or not, there wasn't this idea of like, we can show you how to be an alpha male, right? Or you should do these things to be an alpha male. It was almost kind of like you either are or you aren't kind of thing, or like just pointing out certain people in power or celebrities that are, but it wasn't like this thing that most people were out trying to imitate or what have you. Things really get toxic though in 2005 when a guy named Neil Strauss releases a book called The Game. So you've heard of the pickup artists
Yeah.
movement? Okay, so the early 2000s, if you aren't aware, was unfortunately had a group of people who picked up this idea of the alpha male and what women want according to these kind of very animalistic ideas, and basically came up with tactics to take advantage of things, to make moves, to, you know, if you've ever been nagged or heard of someone nagging you, that was these assholes or whatever. And so Neil Strauss was a journalist, I guess, who went to basically join it, to study it and kind of experience it and write his experience. And the game was his experience in this culture. Okay. In the game, he recounts this time amongst this group led by a guy named Mystery. So you know he's a douchebag and a total asshole. His name's Mystery. He dresses all crazy. That was part of their thing too, peacocking. If you've ever heard of that term, peacocking, used in a way of men maybe who aren't the ideal that women are looking for. So you wear something flashy or fancy to get attention some other way. That was part of their stuff. All of this came from the game. And it was kind of a two-part thing. It was like the game, where he kind of talks about his experience and what they, almost like just kind of like saying, this is what went on here and what was said. And then it was released with this kind of handbook called Rules of the Game, where it was kind of a how-to guide of basically how to trick women into having sex with you when they normally wouldn't want to. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And so here's from a New York Times Magazine article from 2016 titled, How America Became Infatuated with the Cartoonish Idea of Alpha Males. Quote, Mystery explains to Strauss and the other would-be Casanovas what it means to be an alpha. He says, besides confidence and a smile, we learned from Mystery the other characteristics of an alpha male were being well-groomed, possessing a sense of humor, connecting with people, and being seen as the social center of a room.
That's you.
Yeah, sometimes.
All the time. Are you kidding me? You're well groomed.
I know, but like,
you're the social center. Your humor, sense of humor. I mean, sorry.
Everyone bow to me. I'm the alpha male. It's ridiculous.
I know you don't act alpha male, but like that like literally describes you to a T.
Well, I mean, but doesn't that just describe someone who's just, I mean,
that's a certain type of person.
Yeah, I
that's
guess.
You.
Betas, on the other hand, he goes on, and this definition seems consistent wherever you go, are frequently ignored or mocked by women, viewed by their peers as pushovers, and rarely get what they want, partly because they're scared to truly go after it. And so they take this alpha male concept and they go, oh, you're not getting women because you don't know how to act and like put on that display of being an alpha male, right? And so they began teaching these guys how to be total dicks and just assholes. In fact, Neil Strauss, the guy who put out the game and the rules of the game, the last book in that series is called Game Over, where he laments and goes on about the psychological damage and his inability to hold down any long-term relationship because of the indoctrination that happened there.
Yeah.
He's like, literally can't do it. And so it's like, it turns out toxic masculinity, while we made it real through these kinds of concepts, there's a price to be paid for it also.
It will fuck up the man himself.
Yeah, how ironic that
Not
it's like,
just
I did this to get women and now I can't keep a woman because I'm such a dickhead, you know? So that brings us up kind of to the modern day in the 21st century here. And what's unfortunate is this idea of this alpha beta paradigm that you're either an alpha and women like you and you're going to get what you want and people are going to respect you and you're going to have a good life and be happy, or you're a beta and you don't get what you want. You're denied the chance to have sex and all of these things, right? It's kind of this either or. It's a black or white kind of thing. You're either in one camp or the other, and you're fucked if you're in the wrong one. And it began to fuel these very dark corners that were allowed to grow because of the internet and the anonymity and the connectiveness of people from disparate locations that once couldn't meet.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is where the source of like men's rights activists, you know, who are like pushing back against feminism, and the incel community, the involuntary celibate community, which are these guys that were betas. And, okay. And so what they began to do though is rather than go, oh, I need to step up my game or I need to become one of these pickup, they decided to just seethe in anger and blame women mostly.
Yeah.
And they hate people. They call them Chads and Stacys. Chads are the alpha males, and Stacys are the stupid women who can't see that these betas are actually the better ones. And some really bad shit happened. So since then, we've seen this perverted idea of masculinity continue to spread and be held by various communities, mostly by frustrated males, convinced they are betas and there's nothing they can do about it. So they get angry, and they blame women, calling them evil and stupid. They despise the men women are paying attention to. They claim that access to females for sex is an explicit right that is being kept from them. Some even preach ideas that legal rape should be a thing, right? I mean, there's some very dangerous, dark, really evil, I guess you could say, thoughts going on down here, right? And they're largely, though, just kind of commiserating and stuff. And while it's also protected by free speech. And it's kind of like, okay, we got to watch these guys. But unfortunately, some amongst them have kind of bubbled up and actually perpetrated violent acts. For instance, the patron saint of all of these guys, whether it be men's rights or incels and these kind of betas that they feel they're trapped in this kind of place of, I'll just never have the girls that I want because all the Chads get all the Stacys and they can't see that I'm the real alpha male. Their patron saint was a guy named Elliot Rodger. He's the guy from the beginning that perpetrated the Isla Vista shooting in Santa Barbara. In his videos, he states he's going to, quote, wage war against all women and the men they are attracted to. He often refers to himself as the supreme gentleman and the true alpha male, and left behind a manifesto called My Twisted World, the story of Elliot Rodger, where he gives a large, detailed glimpse into how he took on this thinking of the alpha male and now he's relegated to this beta-ness. And he would literally go and like record himself just talking while he sat alone in a car watching a couple on a bench together and just sitting there saying like, everything's wrong. The humans are just disgusting. They're like, everything's wrong everything wrong in the world is right there. That stupid girl who doesn't even see that I'm the real alpha male. I'm the one that she should be with, not that guy, you know? And so he begins to kind of really start formulating this idea that, okay, humans are just animals and I need to do something about it.
So it seems like he's been raised with a deep, deep, deep sense of entitlement, like real deep. Because like we live in this world and we create and we get what we create. And so you enact behaviors that would be attractive. And he's thinking alpha male stuff, but in reality, there's actually behaviors that attract people and repel people, and he's not doing them. Obviously, this guy's mentally ill, and so if he's sociopathic, you say he's got some. If you watch him, I guess you say he's that. So then he's not able to even act in ways that would make people want to be around him, and his brain doesn't probably know why. But so he's then just viciously creating this story of entitlement that he should have this, and it's wrong that he doesn't when he hasn't done any behaviors to make women want to be around him.
Right. A lot of this obviously is in retrospect where he's like, I'm sure recreating this mythological tale of stuff that probably did happen, but he's tying it together in this narrative that isn't accurate. That's why I say he uses this to justify his actions. And that's what makes it dangerous, right? It's not that this is real and he did it because this happened to him. These ideas can be used for this kind of, and we're going to see he's not the only one, right? And so this guy, he goes on this murder spree. He kills 6 kids. He injures 13 others. So he becomes like this figure in this community of like finally someone who's willing to do something about it instead of just talking about it, because that's what they do on these message boards and on 4chan and in all these places where they're kind of living, and Reddit and other places where these people kind of form these communities. They're talking about, oh, we should do this. We should kill all the Chads and Stacys. We should do this. And all of a sudden, this guy does it. So he becomes the hero. He becomes the revolutionary, basically. In 2018, Alec Manassian drove a rented van through a busy section of Toronto, speeding down sidewalks, mowing down pedestrians. In the end, he would kill 10 and injure 16. In a Facebook post before his attack, he wrote, "Private Manassian, Infantry, wishing to speak to Sergeant 4chan, please. The incel rebellion has already begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the supreme gentleman, Elliot Rodger." So here's another guy. Mows a bunch of people down with a van in Toronto. And why does he do it? Because he's standing up and fighting against this alpha-beta paradigm that he feels stuck in. Mm-hmm. And he even says, I'm following in the footsteps of Elliot Rodger. He was the one brave enough to do something about it. And so now I am too.
So you have this belief of alpha male comes in kind of benignly and just gets kind of wrapped up and taken hold and then turns really, really toxic when in the hands of not well people. Right.
When we hear the term toxic masculinity, it's largely informed by this idea.
Yeah.
And when they say incel rebellion, like he did, they also use the word beta uprising. So again, you can see that they definitely are in this idea that we're locked into this hierarchy.
So talk about like you talked about, there's different, these things do play out, the dominance things do play out because people are listening going, but I see this behavior in people. And the reality is, like you were, I think, inferring that these behaviors do play out in different times in different areas of people's lives. One man can be beta in one situation and alpha in a different.
We're going to get to that. Don't blow that.
Oh, we are?
Yeah. So let's get to that right now.
Okay.
So first, I want to read a quote first because I want to talk about, so this idea of alpha kind of started off, as we now understand, wasn't right? It wasn't a true thing. There wasn't this alpha animal. It wasn't an alpha wolf.
Right.
Which then led to this idea that there's an alpha chimp, right? And while they do have dominant structures and there are, dominant males and things like that and dominant females in chimpanzee society, to say it's an alpha is a very reductionist view of it, right? It's more complex than that.
Yeah, but everything.
Right, exactly. And we'll see how it really is more complex in a lot of ways. But really what the chimpanzee did was provide the bridge to get the alpha concept into humans because they were like, wolf and a person who gives a shit, but a chimp, they're just like us. And so the question is, what are we then? Like, then what's going on? Because obviously, if you go to a bar, there are dudes there who are there to fuck or fight. One of those is going to happen, We see that there's dominance. We understand that. We've all felt that. If you're a man, you've all felt that kind of competition with another man. If you're a woman, you felt that ability to get other men to compete maybe or compete yourselves.
Compete with other women, right?
Sure. We all are seeing it and feeling it, and we even feel the response in us. So it's not like this is saying we have no dominance. We clearly do. But it's not this black and white idea that there's alpha and betas. In fact, just the fact saying that is ludicrous. Here, let me read this quote. From a 2016 article from The Guardian entitled, "Do Alpha Males Even Exist?" It says this, quote, "However, when you consider the wealth of other behavioral realities amongst humans that challenge the idea that we are like primates in our social behavior, a highly complex view emerges that makes it impossible to relegate human males to an alpha-beta paradigm. The fact that many communities of men, particularly online, are seemingly convinced that they can all be alpha males is a contradiction in terms. There should only be one alpha male per community. That's sort of the whole point. The rest would try and depose him when the opportunity presents itself, but until then, they are, at best, beta males, a term often used as an insult by members of that community with no sense of irony. So the reason why we can say we don't have alpha males is because we have this shifting, morphing, constantly changing hierarchy within all manner of groups that we exist in. Like you said, like I often tell people, like, hey, man, we have CEOs who are handling billions of dollars and important shit, and very alpha behavior is needed for that, and he fulfills that role. He's the alpha male. And then he goes and pays some dominatrix to spank him and tell him how pathetic he is. That happens every day.
Yeah.
That's not a like fantasy. That's true that people do that. We're way more complex than simply we fulfill this role. Every single one of us could probably sit and go, when I'm with this group, I fulfill this role. And when I'm with this group, I'm kind of the leader. And when I'm with, it's not this cut and dry thing.
Yeah, which is life. I think
Totally.
this is what we end up with all of our discussions is our brain wants to simplify because we need to understand the world around us to feel comfortable. We're just looking for a point of balance and comfort in our psyche. And so simplifying it down to black and white, one this versus that, two things are easier to understand.
Sure, of course.
And then
it's the simplest
make a
way
very
to divide something.
simple
right?
understanding of our world and then go with it because that's just easier. But our world is very complex and getting more complex as we evolve. And we have to start getting comfortable with that and accepting complexity that we are not going to be able to sit and explain. And how do you live with that?
Yeah.
And that's our goal. That's my goal to live with, is not knowing and not being able to name everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we have to fight that urge to fill in those blanks with stuff that it might be, it's usually harmless, right? To be honest.
Yeah.
But then sometimes stuff that even seems harmless or right or scientific or true or experienced isn't. It can have really, really bad effects.
Yeah.
Not just in the sense of someone could kill someone like it has, but just in your own life. You're going to be suffering as you try and act out this thing that you're not really equipped for, that black and white reductionist kind of like view of like, I have to be this or that.
We take some idea and then we take it way too far because we just hold on to believing it in that it's a truth in every situation, and then we just no.
Right. So let's talk about what do we know about humans and animals in general, but humans as an animal when it comes to this. And really, when biologists, one way that they group animals when it comes to this kind of hierarchy and dominance behavior is in two categories. There's trophy species and there's pair bonding species, right? And all kinds of birds and animals, mammals, and even some reptiles and stuff, they fall on this kind of scale of these two different kinds of hierarchies. A trophy species is a species like, think of like an elk or maybe an elephant seal. If you've ever watched like a nature documentary, the elephant seal is always this very dramatic scene because they are an extreme trophy species in the sense that the beach is filled with females and there is one male that establishes, he's called the beach master. There's only one. He doesn't have a cadre of younger males around him. He fucking all summer, all mating season, whenever it is, I don't know what season is, he battles them to the point that most of the males die after they hold a beach, if they can hold it at all for a summer or mating season, because he's so scarred and bloodied. That is a true, if you want to say, alpha male kind of idea. But that only happens within the context of the mating season. Otherwise, that structure is not in place. And so it's kind of like situational. It's not this is how they act all the time. And so that would be a trophy species, right? And trophy species are characterized by something, and that is usually so one sex competes and the other sex chooses. Okay, that's how trophies species work. Like you can imagine elk crashing their antlers while a harem of females watch, and they're going to choose the winner, the victor. And within that, the sex that competes is usually much larger, right? They have the big difference. If you look at a female elk, a cow elk, they're big, but then you put a bull elk next to it, they're fucking giant. Same thing with the elephant seal. Sometimes they like crush and kill the females while they're banging them because they're these monstrosities, and they're big, but they're not that big.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the characteristics. And it's not always males. There's like the jacana bird. I think it's in Africa, somewhere in Africa, the jacana bird. Actually, in that case, it's the other way around. And what determines which one competes and which one chooses is determined by which one bears the most parental responsibility. So in a lot of species, probably most species, the female bears the brunt and spends the most energy when it comes to having the children, rearing the children, preparing the nest if it's, that kind of stuff, right? And so they get to choose the mates because they're going to take on a huge burden. And so they're going to make sure the genes are the best possible to ensure healthy young and strong, they'll go on to reproduce. So like in the case of the jacana bird, the males make the nest. The female just has sex, lays eggs, and bails. The male rears the young, teaches it to fly, is a single parent. And so the females are big and the males are small, and the females compete and the male gets to choose, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. And so there's all kinds of variety out there, within that world of a trophy species, but that's what a trophy species is. And it's usually characterized, like I said, by one sex competes, the other sex chooses, and the one that competes is typically bigger.
Okay.
Because it has to be, or has antlers, some kind of thing that allows it to compete, On the other end of the spectrum are pair bonding species. Lots of birds, right? And mammals, but a lot of birds, we know of like birds that mate for life, and kind of that kind of stuff. So those are pair bonding. And in this case, rather than competing, right, and choosing, they just kind of meet up and decide, hey, we're going to, because of all kinds of factors, who knows, like evolutionary things, they form pairs and they equally bear the responsibility. Like, look at penguins. You can't hardly tell a male penguin from a female penguin in most species of penguins. And you watch them, they like pair up, they build a thing together, they watch the kid together, they take turns going to bring food back so there's like this equity in the parental responsibilities. Okay. And so those are pair bonding species, different kind of hierarchy, different kind of behavior there. But where do we fall?
Well, I see us in both.
Okay, good.
And I actually am thinking I see a more evolved version of us in the pair bonding.
Okay, so one, males are typically bigger in humans. So that implies at least some competition, but we're not like way bigger.
Not way bigger, not always bigger.
And we're not like, we don't have weapons growing out of us, right? We don't have, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're not like,
and you're not,
and as the male matures, all of a sudden he gets these giant spikes out of his head because he's going to be running into other males.
But they're also not always bigger, but typically.
Well, right. And you could say, okay, yes, exactly. And not always.
Right.
But in general,
yeah,
males,
no, I know.
Right.
So I'm saying why it's a mix, because
it is a mix. And I think why it's a mix is because we're kind of just in the middle, to be honest. Because
that's what it seems like.
Yeah, there is a little bit of competition, but we're just slightly different.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, men have different kind of skeletal things and there's lots of reasons why that happened. But one of them is probably competition for females. But because of our long gestation period, like human females are pregnant for a long time with the babies, which makes them expend a lot of energy. I mean, you guys lose a year of your life.
Yeah.
You become incredibly dependent on someone else, right? You need help. Our babies' heads are giant because of our brains, and they got to a point where we evolved social behavior around helping each other have babies. And we have the longest, I think, maturation for any kind of, I think, mammal, where it takes a long time for our babies to become self-sufficient and be able to actually go on their own.
Yeah, very
Right?
long
A giraffe
time.
plops out a baby, and 10 minutes later, it's running alongside of it from a lion, you know? We're like, well, I mean, we have a 25-year-old above us. Anyway, because of that, there's a need for cooperation. And so we also have this kind of, I mean, obviously we have social issues and whatever, but I mean, we do have this need to both cooperate in raising the young, protecting the young, feeding the young, training the young, right? So we're like somewhere in the middle. We have pair bonding characteristics because we need to be pair bonded because of the evolution that we took around that, right? And but there also seems to be some, you know, and again, we can see it acting out. It's not like all dominance displayed in society, whether it be from males or females, comes from a false belief in alpha maleness or something, or alphaness, but it does inform the conscious engagement of that dominance, right? Rather than dealing with it on a complex human level, we try and deal with it in this very like, I'm either acting like an alpha or a beta, you know, and women want alphas and they don't want betas. And that's just not who we are, you know? And so comparing animals and getting this like, well, they do it, so we must do it, has proven to really almost always not turn out to be true in the long run.
Yeah.
When we look at it further, when we get more data and we've observed them in different circumstances, we find out, oh man, we're not like that at all. Diversity. Men and women are diverse creatures with diverse talents and abilities and attractiveness and financial resources and status. It can't be simplified down to alpha and beta. Overall, we're more cooperative and more community-oriented than not. That's how we've succeeded as a species, by working together as a team. That's the thing we can't ignore.
Yeah.
If we existed in this paradigm where in a tribe, we had one leader who always was the leader and exercised his dominance over the whole tribe, we would not have made it here.
Right.
And yeah, we've had governmental systems and stuff that try to kind of play that out, but they've always fallen and failed. We got here because we bring a diverse set of skills to the table, and who's in charge depends very much on the situation.
And what's
like, imagine, you know, they say our brains, the way our brains are now, came together and kind of solidified about 35,000 years ago during the Pleistocene era. You can imagine our hunter-gatherer ancestors with the same brain as ours, so we're like just like them, going out on a hunt and have to follow the leader of this one leader because he's the alpha male and he sucks at hunting. He can't throw a spear straight, you know, whatever. We would have died.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened, right? We evolved in ways that, yes, there's dominance, there's order, there is that hierarchy. We feel that, but there's a whole lot more interconnectedness and interdependence and flexibility in our hierarchy that saying that there's alpha and beta males is ridiculous in light of how complex we are. We should be fascinated with that and not wrapped up in this idea that we've got to somehow step on someone to demonstrate your worthiness to a female or whatever, or a male. And so I would end it like this, like maybe we should start understanding more about what it is to be a human and become the best versions of humans we can be and stop trying to be fucking animals.
Yeah.
That's what bothers me most of all.
Yeah.
Is like, well, there's alpha chimps. I don't give a fuck if there's alpha chimps. Chimps also throw shit at you. You know, like there's a lot of things chimps do that I don't want. So like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And you know, yeah, I really, this concept is so crazy to me because as a man who grew up in this the whole way, I was born in 1970 when this dude fucking book came out. And I definitely got those messages. You know, I've definitely read books. And then I've read books where they just say the same thing, but they couch it in like softer language, but it's the same idea.
And like, I see that you feel internally like not an alpha male, but then you present externally like you are an alpha male. So that's like even more complex in it just is not cut and dry. Because I know when I just said to you earlier when we were talking, I'm like, and you did that description, I was like, well, that's you. And I know you don't identify with an alpha male. So you're like, that's not me because you're thinking alpha male as the label. But when I just, when you listed the characteristics, I'm like, that is exactly you. But you don't behave like an alpha male, even though you have the characteristics that they would describe because you feel yourself internally totally different. So it's just like you talk about complex. It is far more complex and human because animals don't think of themselves. They just are. They just exist in instinct and they're not like, oh, my identity. How do I feel about myself?
Right. As far as we know, they don't sit and self-reflect like, oh man, do I want to be this kind of lion? You know, it's like just doing the same thing day in, day out. It is. That's another thing that makes us so complex. Is that we're trying to label shit and like align ourselves to ideas, which is like, what?
Yeah.
It's weird when you think about. And so be careful. Also, if you feel like, oh, there's nobody for me, there's someone for you.
There is.
There's someone for everyone. I don't know if you've looked around, but people are getting together and you can find someone too. You don't have to resort to trying to fool women into thinking you're some tough guy, alpha male kind of person. You don't have to do all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So be careful what you believe.
Yeah.
And, sometimes shit that you've been sold and stuff that there was no answer for, you find out something you got to change.
Yep. Let's just clean it up. There's always new information to have, so we can just clean up, clean out.
Let's just clean it up, folks.
Yes,
Come on, clean it up.
Clean up our brains. Clean it out. I mean, it's understandable that thinking was there. Like, we had no way of not having it there. We were born into a culture and it was there. But let's just clean out the shit when we find it to be shit.
Right. That's why it's like when you look at the story, that's why I say, like, no one's to blame here. I mean, the pickup artist guys were douchebags, but there's always douchebags. So it's not like they were some special thing. They would have been douchebags around something else.
Yeah.
No one's to blame, really. It's more like,
when you know better, do better.
yeah, and it's just kind of what we do with information, right? And so we get information, and this is the shit we did, and then we have to get to this point where you're like, oh, that was all wrong information. So let's stop doing those things, and it's interesting how much information is available out there that refutes the idea of alpha male, and how little anyone ever sees it, and I don't know why that is.
Yeah. Information goes out, and then it's the correction. It's like in the newspaper or whatever. It's this little tiny blurb that no one sees.
Oh, you know how many fucking times I see an ad for like some men's coaching program or podcast or whatever that is wrapped in the language of the alpha male and being an alpha male. I mean, they're trying to put this conscious or like mature edge on it. And whatever, I'm sure it's fine. It's still language that gives the wrong impression.
Yeah.
That there's only one way to be.
And didn't you say David like realized it was wrong? He wrote about it. He talked about it.
Oh yeah, he's tried to get his book taken off the shelves, and they won't do it because it still sells.
It's making money.
I watched him in a couple interviews where he's literally like bemoaning the fact. He's like, it sucks because it was my research that did this, and now I'm trying to go, no, it was wrong. We didn't have wild wolves. Turns out they act different in captivity, which added a whole new
trying to
complexity.
Correct it, and no one's listening to the correction.
Ooh, that might apply to us too. Like, are we in captivity? Maybe we're not acting like we would in the wild. We don't know.
Yeah.
We're all trapped in our jobs, in our homes, in our fucking societal structures. What if we were out roaming the goddamn wilderness as roving tribes of humans? Would we act different? Don't know. But
well, that's why I was saying the more evolved versions of us are the pair bonding. Like you were saying, are we trophy or are we pair bonding? We're kind of a mix. And I was saying in your description of the pair bonding was more equal. Even though like the woman carries the child and it taxes her more to raise children, and she could be left with the child, but so could the man be left with the child once it's out. and we have this kind of more equalness, or that's what we're like moving towards, or what we raise up as the better ideal is the
Yeah.
equal, is what we hold in our culture as ideal now. Well, I guess what.
I know, and I wonder, just sitting here, I wonder if it's tied somehow to like population, like the ability for a population to grow too. Because if you think about like a trophy species, um, like the mating opportunity, like literally like one male is winning. Just because he won that fight doesn't mean that he doesn't have DNA that's like a ticking time bomb and those babies aren't going to make it or there's going to be the end of like it just seems like when you have a bunch of animals, when you
Mm-hmm.
have then that pair bonding stuff makes sense too because there's just more variety of like mating which creates more variety of the gene pool which creates a more resilient kind of population. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like imagine if we operated like those trophy species, we would have very like smaller number of genetic lines because
Yeah.
just one
Right.
male would
Right.
mate with and have a whole bunch of offspring.
Right. Right.
We'd be like fucking
Genghis Khan.
exactly. I was just thinking that. That's what happened over there. He had a shit ton of kids, and so
What
everyone's
song is
got a little
that?
Genghis Khan in him over there.
What song is that?